Today, we are honored by Professor Jeffrey Weiss, who will be speaking to us tonight on redistricting here in New York. Professor Weiss is considered to be the guru on redistricting, voting rights, and census laws. Jeff spoke to us last year on the shifting of New York's population and how it might impact the state. Since then, a lot has happened. And today he's going to talk about the battle over the redrawing of these voting districts, what's happening and what's next. Jeff is an adjunct professor, senior fellow at New York Law School. He is a national expert on redistricting and has been included in Roll Call's list of the top 50 Washington policy insiders. He is now working on his 5th redistricting cycle. He has assisted many state legislative leaders, members of Congress, and other state and local government officials on redistricting and voter right matters across the nation. I don't think he needs additional introduction. Let me turn this program over to Professor Jeffrey Weiss.
Thank you very much for the wonderful introduction. And thank you for having Speaker Adams on. She's been a friend, a great leader, and someone that I've been very proud to advise on redistricting law as New York City approaches its redistricting process, something I'll be talking about in a few minutes. I've presented before the league before on redistricting, why it happens, why it's necessary. I start with asking you to look out your window, your streets, your hospitals, your schools, your senior centers. Everything that government does to affect your quality of life is somehow dependent on who represents you in Washington, Albany, and City Hall. And that's determined by redistricting, the redrawing of district boundaries once every 10 years based on the decennial census. We're now about a third of the way through 2022. It's been a rocky road taking the census. Donald Trump made several efforts to politicize the census, to add a citizenship question, to add a chilling effect so that people of color would not respond to the census. He tried to fudge the numbers. All of those efforts failed. But coupled with the pandemic, that caused a delay in the receipt of census data by the states. It's caused delays to the ability of states and cities to redistrict, often in a timely manner. As a result of the congressional apportionment, which should have taken place at the end of 2020, but instead was delayed until April 2021, New York State lost one congressional district. Going back to World War II, New York had 45 members of Congress. We now have 27 members. That's the same number the state had in the 1820s. And beginning next year or after this year's election, we go down to 26 districts. And as you may all may have heard when the apportionment came out, New York State avoided losing a congressional district by 98 people, or 89 people rather, the size of one packed subway car, where Minnesota was able to save a district with about 25 people. So every person counts. We can't go back and redo the numbers, but we came so close not to losing a single district for the first time in 70 years because New York lost population and congressional representation beginning in 1950, 60, 70, 80, 90, all the way through this past reapportionment, but only lost one district. So where we are now is that the state legislature has taken that census data and has already redrawn the state's congressional and state legislative district lines based on an amendment that the voters approved in 2014. A commission was created to recommend to the legislature new districts for the Congress, the Senate, and the Assembly. That commission consisted of 10 members appointed by the legislative leaders, but sadly, they did not get their job done. They were tasked with recommending a first set of lines to the legislature in January. They were unable to agree and send competing sets of Assembly, Senate, congressional lines, a Democratic plan and a Republican plan. The legislature rejected both of those. And then late January, the commission was tasked with going back to the drawing board, excuse me, and come and develop a second set of maps. But there they couldn't even get a second set of maps agreed to, or even separate sets of maps. The commission basically imploded and went out of business. That left the legislature, in my view, no choice but to pick up and redraw the lines itself, a task assigned to it, as it's been the case for the last 200 plus years in the state constitution. So the Assembly and Senate bills were passed along with a separate bill for Congress on February 3rd. The congressional plan reflected the loss of one congressional district. The Senate lines and the Assembly lines were both significant in that they brought down population disparities between large districts and small districts, among upstate districts and downstate districts, all brought down to a very low level of difference among the districts. And there was almost minimal change done in the Assembly. In the Senate, the New York City area, the 12 or 13 counties south of Westchester and Rockland counties were awarded with 2 additional districts that should have been in the New York City area 10 years ago, had there been a fair apportionment in the Assembly, where you had more districts drawn for Democrats downstate and fewer for Republicans upstate. Again, the population differences were narrowed. And for the congressional plan, 26 districts were drawn. Those districts reflected the loss of population upstate and also the increase in New York City of over 600,000 people added to the census rolls since 2010. Later on February 3rd, a lawsuit was filed in state court in Steuben County along the southern tier before a state Supreme Court justice by a group of Republicans. They argued that the congressional plan was a blatant partisan gerrymander drawn to benefit the Democratic Party at the expense of the Republican Party, that it would eliminate the Republican ability to hold 8 districts and minimize that by objective standards down to 4 districts. That challenge also alleged that the state Senate map was a partisan gerrymander. So that case was heard by a Steuben County judge, Patrick McAllister, a Republican conservative. And at the end of March, he issued his decision because the state constitution only provides 60 days for a decision once a lawsuit is filed. And Judge McAllister found a few things. First, he faulted the legislature for redistricting in the first place. He argued that under his read of the Constitution, the commission had to have submitted a set of maps, any set of maps, to the legislature in order for the legislature to vote on it up or down and then proceed. Because under the state constitution, the commission is entitled to 2 opportunities to send sets of maps to the legislature. But because, as I said, the commission failed to act, then the legislature took it upon itself to finish the job. The judge said, no, you couldn't do that because you didn't have a second set of maps to vote on from the commission. Maybe not your fault. Maybe the commission didn't do its job. Nonetheless, you acted out of hand. And then the judge also found that the congressional plan was in fact a partisan gerrymander. Now, my own view of it was that both sides presented facts, arguments, calculations, and analyses on the congressional plan that it was or that it wasn't a partisan gerrymander. Republicans argued, of course it was. Look at the proportionality of how many votes Republicans get statewide against how many seats they get. Democrats argued you cannot judge an election based on predictions. But the judge basically cast aside all of the analyses and simply said that the congressional plan was a partisan gerrymander. and that the legislature had no ability to act. But nonetheless, he gave the legislature until yesterday, April 11th, to develop plans for the Congress and the legislature and to report back to him with new plans that garnered bipartisan support in both chambers. We've never seen a court direct a legislature on how to vote, but that's what the judge did. The state, meaning attorneys for Andrea Stewart Cousins in the Senate, Carl Hastie in the Assembly, and Kathy Hochul for the governor's office through the Attorney General Letitia James, all filed an appeal to that decision. And under the New York court rules, as soon as you appeal a decision of the state Supreme Court, the trial court, those decisions are stayed or, in practical parlance, put on hold. And last Thursday, a judge in Rochester in the Fourth Department of the Appellate Division heard arguments and then ruled, I think on Friday of last week, that that the stay would remain in effect, that the state could proceed with the primary schedule. As we all know, petitioning under the new lines ended last Thursday, so the day after, so as not to cause too much havoc to the electoral system this year, the judge allowed the state to proceed using the lines, but with the caveat that should the state court of appeals, the next leg up in the appeal process, side with the Republican plaintiffs who brought the case, that the trial judge can go ahead and appoint a special master, an independent outside expert, to redraw the congressional plan and possibly the Senate and Assembly, just in case the Court of Appeals sided with the plaintiffs. And we might hear from the lower court judge about whether he's going to do that in the next hour or two. We don't know yet, but the appellate court did set today, the 12th, as a deadline to hear something from the lower court. In the meantime, the appellate court, we call it the appellate division, is going to hear the arguments on the merits, the substance of the judges, Steuben County judges ruling on April 20th. And then the appellate division decision whether to keep the plan from the legislature alive, whether to reject it. That goes to the State Court of Appeals in Albany, where we expect a decision sometime in May. In the meantime, the current election cycle can move forward using the lines that the legislature enacted. There's a possibility, although it's a remote one, that the State Court of Appeals could reject the lines and order yet a delayed primary with new lines in August. It can reject the plan and order new lines for 2024, or it can simply dismiss the case. I'll mention that the State Court of Appeals has not rejected a single state legislatively enacted redistricting plan in over 50 years. The State Court of Appeals believes, at least in the past, that it gives deference to the state legislative leaders, that it's their job to draw the lines, that unless they violated the law in a very clear, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the legislature's plan will be upheld. So we have to see what the courts are going to do. But if I were to give you in a nutshell where we stand now, the lines enacted in early February will likely be used in this year's elections, and we'll have to wait and see from the courts whether they're going to change that for a future date. Now, I'd like to move over to the New York City Council process, which is a much different process, different laws, different standards, different people, different calendar. The congressional and the state legislative lines have to be used in this year's election because this is the first election taking place after the federal decennial census. The census was taken in 2020. The lines get redrawn in 2021, early 2022, and they get used for the 2022 election. For the city council, with an odd year election in 2023, the city, under the city charter, a separate commission is appointed by the mayor the legislative leaders in the city council. And I'm going to use a slideshow, a PowerPoint, to walk through that process. I did see there was one question here in the chat. A question, I'll just read it out here from Laura Quigg. Hi, Laura. Is there any difference in the makeup of the State Court of Appeals that might make them more likely to reject the lines than they have in the past? Well, my sense of it is probably not. That the Court of Appeals in Albany was appointed entirely by either Kathy Hochul or Andrew Cuomo, all Democrats. The trial court judge was a Republican, the appellate judge a Democrat, at least by their backgrounds. And the Court of Appeals with judges from both party appointments have never rejected anything done by the legislature since the 1960s. But these judges, they're all new since the last redistricting, so it's too premature to say how they might rule. It's always a hard question to answer. If I could please ask for screen sharing privileges, I think I have that. So I'm going to just walk you through a PowerPoint, which you should see now. Okay, it says participants can now see my application. That's good. And I'll blow it up a little bit and just walk you for a few minutes through the New York City Council process. So we have a commission, 15 members. The mayor appointed his members in March. The city council appointed its members in February. Speaker Adams appointed 5 people. The minority leader, Joe Borelli, appointed 3 people. On March 7th, Mayor Eric Adams appointed 7 people. So there were 15 members, and 1 was selected to serve as the chair. The chair selected was Queens Public Library President Dennis Walcott. And among the members of the commission, important to note that no single political party can constitute a majority of the commission membership. So in an overwhelmingly Democratic city, the Democrats cannot control this commission. There are Democrats, Republicans, independents, and others. So we have a balanced commission to start. Now the commission at this point is, as they call it these days, onboarding. They're attempting to hire staff, open an office, which will be located at 253 Broadway. For staff, former New York City Board of Elections member John Flateau from Brooklyn has been selected as the staff director. They're going to develop a website, conduct outreach, and conduct a series of public hearings, probably 2 or 3 rounds of public hearings before, during, and after map development in each of the 5 boroughs. But I'm speaking based on my work for the last 2 commissions. The new commission has yet to organize because that's all in the process of being done now. So we have a process timeline here. The commission, and just be mindful that today is today is April 12th. The commission has to hold 1 or more public hearings to receive input by June of 2022. What's most likely to happen is that the commission will hold preliminary hearings, 1 in each borough, sometime in May. They have to have a draft plan of the 51 council districts by July of this year. And the commission must also submit its first draft plan to the city council by August 7th. Now, the city council then has 3 weeks to determine by a vote whether to adopt the plan or to enact a resolution rejecting the plan and informing the commission of its objections. And if that happens, and that's been the case since 1990, 2000, 2010, the commission has to go back and develop a second revised plan by October 7th of this year, make it available to the council for review, but not a vote, and then hold additional public hearings. And after all is said and done, the commission has to submit its final plan to the city clerk by December 7th, a plan based on the approval of at least 9 of the 15 members. And the commission stays in business until January of next year. And then the commission's new lines get used for the election cycle to elect new members of the council, all 51 members in 2023. The various laws that impact redistricting, you have population equality, one person, one vote. Each district has to be basically equal in population to all the others. We have the Federal Voting Rights Act, which requires in certain situations that minority districts be created where you have high levels of racially polarized voting to make sure that minority voters have their ability to elect their preferred candidates. We have the 14th Amendment, which bars what's called racial gerrymandering or packing too many minority voters into a district in excess of what's needed to elect the preferred minority candidate. Just as an example, you might have a district that will elect the minority preferred candidate with 51% of the minority vote. If you create a minority district, that means Black, Hispanic, or Asian, let's say 70 or 80% Black, Hispanic, or Asian, that could be seen as packing and preventing the minority community from electing, let's say, 2 candidates. Partisan gerrymandering is something that is now left to state courts. That's why we had a state court challenge to the congressional plan in in state court rather, because the federal courts have closed the door to hearing partisan cases based on the 2019 U.S. Supreme Court decision, Rucho versus Common Cause, that determined that federal courts don't have the ability to adjudicate partisan cases because there's no judicially manageable standard on when to determine how far politically a redistricting plan might have gone. Now, the city charter has very specific criteria that the commission must follow in developing its plan. First off, the least populous and most populous districts can only have, there should be a 5% deviation from the average population of the district. Means that the difference from largest to the smallest district cannot be any different than by plus or minus 2.5%, or an overall difference of 5%. The standard used to be 10%, but last October, Governor Hochul signed legislation for all local governments in New York that brought that deviation difference down from 10% down to 5%. And my apologies for not having corrected that in advance. The city charter also requires that racial and language minority groups, and that for New York City means Black, Hispanic, and Asian groups, also Native American Islanders, be reflected proportionately to their population from the last census. The districts have to also keep communities and neighborhoods with established ties, such as socioeconomic criteria, history, race, economic status, keep those kinds of communities intact. That each district, and this is important here because it's an exact measurement, that each district shall be compact and may not be more than twice as long as it is wide. Districts cannot also cross county boundaries, and districts cannot be joined for the purposes of separating concentrations of partisan voters, Democrats and Republicans, into districts to diminish their ability to elect their candidates. That basically is a New York City ban on partisan gerrymandering. The districts must also be drawn to minimize the sum of the length of the boundaries of all districts. When you add all the sides up together, you have to have the lowest number possible with mathematical equations. Districts must also be contiguous, meaning that you have to be able to travel from one end of the district to another and not leave the district. And because we have so many waterways in New York City, that to connect a district by water, you have to have a bridge, tunnel, tramway, or a ferry service that would connect the non-connected parts. And also there's a restriction that if a district must cover 2 boroughs, then no other district may include territory from the same 2 boroughs. In a practical sense, that means that we have one district now that covers Brooklyn and Queens, and one that covers Manhattan and the Bronx. We don't have any districts that will cover, let's say, Manhattan and the Bronx and Manhattan and Queens. That would be a violation. This may be a little confusing, but suffice it to say that there is a pecking order of criteria that when you go from higher to lower, you are insulating the plan from any kind of legal attack. So that basically is my presentation. I'd be glad to answer any questions or engage in any conversation you might have. I know I've given you a lot. There's no quiz at the end of of this presentation, but I wanted to give you a quick overview in the time that I had. Also, I apologize for any coughing. I was at Radio City Music Hall last week. I contracted a very mild case of COVID. I'm recovered, but the lingering cough is still there. Just in time to be ready for the league.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming anyway, in spite of all of that. Yeah, thank goodness we're separated. That's nice to know. Any questions? I guess I have one. Now, one of the, if I'm right, and maybe I've lost track, there is one district that includes Staten Island, parts of Staten Island and part of Brooklyn, and that's okay. And it seems that most of Staten Island is Republican, and this particular section of Brooklyn is Democratic.
Staten Island itself cannot contain its own number of districts. So part of Staten Island has to go either by ferry over to Manhattan or by bridge to Brooklyn, where you're going to find Democratic voters in both boroughs.
Okay. So that's because there's a train, or there.
You have to be able to connect
ferry, or there's a bridge.
A ferry, a tramway. We all know where the tramway is. A tunnel or a bridge to connect separate pieces of land.
Okay, is there anything else here? I'm kind of astonished. Maybe everybody is just worn out from all the exciting news.
I see one hand raised.
Okay, who? Oh, yes, Laura. Come on. Yes.
Thanks for joining us, Jeff. I was wondering if you have any analysis of data or crystal ball as to population shifts and makeup of different communities of interest within the city that might, that you think you can anticipate there would be some changes in the way that the city council maps are drawn.
Well, the three biggest factors that go into those kinds of changes are: number one, the city increased its population by over 600,000 people from 2010. Secondly, the population differences among the districts now was set at 10% as 10% limit. They're going to have to bring that down to a 5% limit. So districts will be tighter, so to speak. And then third, both the Hispanic population in Queens and the Asian population in Brooklyn increased dramatically. We saw in the state Senate plan how Queens gained a new majority Hispanic district, and in Brooklyn, a plurality Asian district. So you might see the same shifts in the city council of creating more opportunities for Asian American and Hispanic communities. That might be one change that we should expect or could expect.
Thanks.
Anything else? Are we all exhausted? Are we all overwhelmed with everything? Definitely, this is an interesting time, and I know the changes that have been happening with the voting districts has just been from moment to moment almost. They change from moment to moment. So there's a lot going on and a lot of information that still is not set. In fact, it's just still in transition. Okay, anything else you can think of? Any questions we should have asked?
I see one hand raised.
Oh, there's Kathy Gray. Hi, Kathy. You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi. I think, I know this was supposed to be on the city, but the state redistricting is very interesting with all the machinations of the court appearances. So where can we watch that court appearance again?
Okay, well, at 2 o'clock on April 20th, you want to Google New York State Appellate Division, 4th Department. They have a website, and on their website, there will be a link to where you can watch the proceedings before the 5 appellate judges on April 20th at 2 p.m.
Do you think it's going to succeed?
My personal view, just based on having been around a long time, is that the State Court of Appeals has written several opinions, most recently 10 years ago, that said that we give the legislature a lot of discretion in what they're doing, that they've gone through a process that we have not, and that we will prefer to yield to their judgments than make one of our own unless there is a serious violation of state law beyond a reasonable doubt. They've never reached that standard yet. And even when in 1992, the state Senate impermissibly cut or divided too many upstate counties, the court said that might be an imperfection, but the overall plan itself does not warrant throwing it out. 10 years ago, when the Senate Republicans increased the size of the state Senate from 62 to 63 districts, the court said, we find the Senate's action questionable, but not illegal. So we're just going to let it stand. So that's been their precedent, that's been their tradition. But again, we have a new court that has not been on the bench before, but we have a new court that was appointed by Democratic governors.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else we should have covered, Jeff?
I think that basically covered everything there is on it. If any of you are from Nassau, Suffolk, Westchester, they've got separate processes there as well for their county legislatures. But I think for the state and city, I've covered the basic turf.
Okay, well, with that, first of all, thank you so much, particularly since you're still recovering. And I know you gave another presentation before this, is that correct?
I spoke before the mayor's Democracy New York City working group, about 50 people.
Oh, my goodness.
Well, I'm
You should
off
relax.
quarantine. I'm off quarantine. I'm free to go out in the streets, but I've got to play it safe.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you so much for coming again and keeping us up to date on all of these new developments here in New York. I know both city and state. This was been great. We'll probably have you back again soon just to find out what else is going on.
Okay,
But,
no, my pleasure.
Okay, thank you so
Okay,
much.
good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.